Welcome to TEIMAS Talks. In this episode, we'll be addressing a topic that has been stirring up a lot of conversations recently, the new Waste Shipments Regulation. This regulation entered into force in May 2024 and promises significant changes for waste management across Europe and beyond. Today, we're going to break down what it means, why it matters, and how it will impact the shipments of waste, particularly in relation to non-OECD countries and e-waste. To help us understand all of this, we're joined by our guest, Cristina Vázquez, CEO of TEIMAS, who is an expert in waste management and sustainability policies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to talk about this matter that is a hot topic at this moment.
So let's start with the basics, because although the new Waste Shipments Regulation is a pretty big deal, it might be unfamiliar to many people. Could you explain what the new regulation is all about?
Sure. Let's start with a global vision first. Waste exports from the EU to non-EU countries have increased by 72% in the last 20 years. It reached 35 million tons of waste in 2023. That's a massive amount of waste leaving Europe borders. And it really highlights why this regulation matters so much. The new Waste Shipment Regulation is the European way to take better care of our waste, but also to make better use of our resources and raw materials. It sets stricter rules for how waste is shipped within the EU, how it's imported, and maybe more importantly, how it's exported to other parts of the world.
So, what's the intention of the new regulation?
The idea is to make sure that waste, especially hazardous or hard-to-recycle materials, isn't just being dumped into countries with fewer environmental protections. It also puts more responsibility on companies to prove that the waste will be managed properly wherever it ends up. So, in a nutshell, it's about tightening the rules, increasing transparency and digitalisation, and making sure that Europe doesn't just push its environmental problems and part of its resources onto someone else's doorstep.
Right, so this regulation has two main parts, the internal EU shipments and the export-import rules. Let's talk about exports for a second. What's changing there, especially when it comes to non-OECD countries?
Right, let's start with a quick refresher on what the OECD actually is. The acronym stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's an organization made up of 38 member countries. It promotes economic growth and international trade. Now, onto the key change. Under the new regulation, exports of some non-hazardous or green-listed waste to non-OECD countries will no longer be allowed. This is a significant step forward in preventing the EU from dumping its waste in countries that may lack the infrastructure or environmental regulations to manage it safely.
It seems like a big change. Will it affect all waste transfers?
From May 2027, waste exports from the EU to non-OECD countries will only be allowed if those countries inform the European Commission that they really want to import the waste, and if they can demonstrate sustainable management capacity. Just a few months ago, in February, 24 countries made requests to be included in the list of countries that will be able to import non-hazardous waste from the EU. Now, the European Commission will assess these applications and draw up a list of non-OECD countries authorized to import specific waste streams from the EU.
And when it comes to plastic waste, the regulation also has some special provisions, doesn't it?
Plastic waste is a major focus under the new regulation. Exports of non-hazardous plastic waste to non-OECD countries will be banned starting November 2026. These exports won't be permitted for at least 2.5 years. After that period, those countries may import plastic waste again if they can comply with strict rules and the European Commission evaluates them positively. If we talk about exports to OECD countries, there will also be changes. From May 2026, exports of non-hazardous plastic waste to OECD countries must follow the PIC procedure. It means that companies will need to request a special authorization to the origin and destination country to move the plastic waste. Plastics are a priority concern for the European Union, so they will be highly controlled.
That sounds like a positive move, definitely. But there are still some steps companies will need to take, right? What are the main obligations for those looking to export waste?
Yes. Companies now have to provide a lot more evidence that their waste is being properly managed once it arrives at its destination. They will need to make sure that the treatment facilities in the receiving country are up to scratch. All European companies exporting waste outside the EU must be sure that the receiving facilities undergo independent audits. Those audits must demonstrate that the facility will manage the waste in a proper way. If an audit finds that waste isn't being handled properly, the company will need to stop exporting to that facility. So there's a much greater level of accountability.
And what do you think the impact of this will be on waste exports from the EU? Will it be a challenge for businesses?
It could be a challenge for some business, especially those that have been exporting non-hazardous waste to non-OECD countries. They'll need to make sure that they are partnering with countries that meet the new requirements. It will also take time for these countries to adapt the new rules, so there might be a bit of a learning curve. However, in the long term, this should lead to a more sustainable and responsible approach to waste management.
Okay, now let's move on to e-waste for a moment, because that's a growing concern globally. How does the new regulation handle shipments of electronic waste?
E-waste is a significant part of the regulation focus. Starting in 2025, all e-waste exports to non-OECD countries will be prohibited. For OECD countries, e-waste will be subject to the PIC procedure, and in January 2027, e-waste transfer inside the EU will be also subject to the PIC procedure. This means greater supervision and control by the authorities. This is a very significant step, both to avoid environmental and health impacts in third countries and to maintain strategic resources within the EU.
Okay, it sounds like there's a real emphasis on traceability. How does this come into play in the new regulation?
That's right. Traceability is a huge part of the new rules. From 2026, most waste shipments within the EU will move from paper-based documentation to a fully electronic system. This will make it much easier to track waste and ensure that it's being handled properly. It will also help prevent illegal waste shipments and make the whole system more transparent and accountable.
I imagine enforcement will be the key, especially when it comes to illegal waste shipments. What steps are being taken to ensure that the regulation is followed?
The EU is setting up a waste shipment enforcement group, which will include environmental agencies, customs, police, and other relevant authorities. This group will be monitoring and preventing illegal shipments. The EU will also work closely with international networks and third countries to help fight waste trafficking. There will be much more coordination across borders to ensure that the rules are being followed and that countries are held accountable.
This is such an important topic, and from what you have just explained, it's clear that these changes will have a big impact. Do you think the Waste Shipments Regulation will set a global precedent for waste management?
The regulation is an important step in setting global standards. If successful, it could inspire other countries to adopt similar measures and improve how they manage waste. The global challenge of waste management is huge, and the EU's leadership could play a key role in shaping international approaches.
Thank you so much for this insightful conversation. We've covered a lot today, from new rules on e-waste and plastics to the increasing emphasis on traceability and enforcement. And before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to add about the future of waste shipments?
I'd just like to emphasize that this is a turning point. The shift toward more responsible waste management practices is something we've been working on for a long time. There will be challenges along the way, but the benefits, both environmentally and economically, are huge. In a world where access to resources can be a problem, the use of waste is key. Even for companies, better control of their waste is, of course, an obligation, but also an economic opportunity. The Waste Shipments Regulation is an important step, but we can't forget that it's just one part of the bigger picture of a global waste management.
Thank you, Cristina. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks again for sharing all your expertise.
Thank you, Perla.
And for all of our listeners, stay tuned for more discussions on sustainability and environmental policies. Until next time.